Imagine, imagine for a second you're sitting in a hospital waiting room.
Okay.
It's a scenario we all know, right? You're sitting there, you're cradling this swollen, bruised forearm.
Yeah, totally miserable.
Exactly. And you finally get called back. The technician runs you through the x-ray machine. And a few minutes later, the doctor pulls up that stark black and white image on the monitor.
Right, the moment of truth.
Right. And they point to a jagged white line running right through the bone. And they say, well, there it is. That's the fracture. Now, how do we set this?
Which is how you solve a physical problem.
Exactly. And usually when we talk about trying to solve massive civilization-level problems, things like figuring out a carbon tax or addressing a pandemic or, I don't know, fixing a broken economic system.
We assume we're all looking at the same X-ray.
Yes. There's this almost invisible assumption that we are looking at the exact same image. It's like engineering. You find the structural failure, you point at it, and the debate is just supposed to be about the best way to fix it.
Which makes sense. I mean, historically, that's exactly how public discourse functioned.
Right.
It was built on this premise of observability. We might argue vehemently about, the best type of cast or how much the medical procedure should cost or if the government should pay for it.
Sure.
But we don't argue about the existence of the bone itself. I mean, the bone is the shared baseline.
But then, you step out of that metaphorical hospital and into the modern public square.
It's all a different world out there.
It really is. You step into our current cultural discourse, and suddenly that x-ray machine isn't just broken. Half the people in the waiting room are arguing that bones are like a hoax invented by a corrupt medical elite to sell calcium supplements.
Right.
And the other half are screaming that x-rays are actually a surveillance tool used for social control.
Yeah, it's wild. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
It is. We are looking at a landscape where people are no longer just deadlocked over how to solve a problem. We are deadlocked over whether the atmosphere itself even exists.
And frankly, it's paralyzing.
Oh, totally. And if you're listening to this right now, you have absolutely felt the vertigo of this reality.
Oh, everyone has.
Yeah. You felt it in a comment section or watching the news or sitting across the table from a relative at Thanksgiving, just wondering, how are we living on two completely different planets?
Because if a society cannot agree on the basic coordinates of reality, it just cannot navigate. I mean, you can't steer the ship if the crew is fighting over whether the ocean is made of water or, a conspiracy.
Right.
What we are experiencing is a systemic collapse of shared reality, and our traditional tools for fixing it they're failing miserably.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring a truly fascinating, deeply layered essay by Jamie Thornberry called The Epistemic Breach.
It's a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. And I want to set the stakes right at the top here.
Yeah.
Because the thesis we are unpacking today is going to completely change how you view every frustrating, wall-punching argument you've ever observed.
Or participated in.
Exactly. Thornberry argues that the reason we are stuck in this exhausting post-truth era is that we are misdiagnosing the disease entirely.
We really are. We keep treating the collapse of shared reality as a political malfunction or like a communication malfunction.
All right. We think, if we just build better algorithm filters.
Yeah, or if we just hire more independent fact checkers, we can fix it.
But Thornberry says no. It is actually an ontological crisis. It is a disorder of being before it is a disorder of knowledge.
And that distinction, that is the key that unlocks this entire phenomenon.
So if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer relativity of online discourse.
Or if you've ever wondered why throwing a meticulously researched, peer-reviewed stack of facts at someone never ever changes their mind.
Right. This deep dive is going to explain the invisible architecture behind that exact frustration.
Thornberry's pointing out that our civilization has inadvertently severed knowledge from the actual structure of reality. We've basically unmoored the boat, and now we are wondering why we're drifting.
I want to start by building the foundation of this problem, because we hear terms like epistemic instability or polarization thrown around on cable news constantly.
All the time.
But Thornberry makes it very clear that what we are living through right now has moved way past traditional political disagreement.
Oh, completely.
This isn't just the left and the right having different strategies for shared goals, like tweaking marginal tax rates.
Not at all. I mean, traditional disagreement assumes a shared factual baseline. You and I agree the budget deficit is, say, X billion dollars.
Right, and we just disagree on whether to cut spending or raise taxes to fix it.
Exactly. But what we have transitioned into is something entirely different. It is characterized by willful, strategic fact denialism.
It's deliberate.
It's incredibly deliberate. We are seeing the creation of an environment where objective facts are completely subordinated to emotional appeals and narratives designed solely to protect tribal identities.
And the source material points out that this fragmentation of reality isn't just one big mess, right? It's actually running on two very distinct parallel tracks.
Yes, the essay breaks them down into psychological science rejection, or PSR, and ideological science rejection, ISR.
Okay, let's get into those tracks because I really want to pull these apart.
Yeah.
Starting with PSR. Because understanding this feels like getting the decoder ring for human behavior.
It really does.
How exactly does this psychological track work?
Well, psychological science rejection operates on an implicit, almost subconscious level. It's driven by a very deep evolutionary human need.
Which is what?
The need to maintain your status within your affinity group, your tribe, essentially.
No, interesting. So it's about survival.
Exactly. Think about human evolution. For tens of thousands of years, if you were wandering the savannah and you disagreed with your tribe to the point of being exiled,
You died.
you died. Social cohesion was quite literally a matter of life and death. So our brains evolved to prioritize social survival over objective truth. So today, if accepting a certain scientific fact, say, about climate change or vaccine efficacy or election integrity, if that threatens your standing in your community, your brain will unconsciously reject the fact.
It just blocks it out.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon called identity protective cognition.
So if I'm understanding the mechanism here, you aren't waking up in the morning maliciously deciding to destroy the scientific method.
No, not at all.
Your brain is essentially running this background threat assessment. It looks at a chart showing rising global temperatures and calculates, if I believe this chart, and I say I believe this out loud, I will be ostracized by my peer group.
I will lose my friends.
Right. I'll lose my community. Therefore, for my own social survival, the chart must be fundamentally flawed.
That is the exact biological and psychological mechanism. It's just a defense mechanism. You're rejecting specific counter-attitudinal evidence because accepting it costs you too much socially. You simply cannot afford to believe it.
You know, that makes me look at those frustrating arguments with far more empathy.
It changes the whole perspective.
It really does. It's not necessarily a lack of intelligence. It's a fear of isolation.
Exactly.
But okay, that's just the psychological track. The second track, ideological science rejection, or ISR. That feels much more aggressive.
Oh, it is entirely more aggressive. While PSR is subconscious and defensive, ISR is explicit and offensive. It is elite-driven contestation.
So what does that mean in practice?
Well, when we talk about ideological science rejection, we aren't just talking about an individual doubting a specific claim about CO2 levels. We're talking about a systemic, coordinated rejection of the entire institutional apparatus that produces knowledge.
So this is political stagecraft.
100%. It substitutes emotion and tribal signaling for actual discourse. The goal of ISR isn't to publish a counter-study saying, hey, we found an error in your methodology regarding this specific data point.
Right. They're not trying to do better science.
No. The goal is to broadcast a message that says the entire monopoly on truth held by scientists, academia, and the mainstream media is a corrupt, populist, oppressing system, and we reject its authority entirely.
So it's an attack on the referee, not the call on the field.
Precisely.
Which brings up a really crucial distinction in the source material. Thornberry borrows a concept from the philosopher Harry Frankfurt.
Ah, yes. Frankfurt's essay.
Yeah, Frankfurt wrote this incredibly famous, deeply influential essay defining the philosophical difference between a liar and a bullshitter.
It's a classic.
And mapping this onto PSR and ISR is fascinating. I mean, think about it. If I am lying to you, I am still playing the same game as you.
Right.
Like, if I steal a cookie from the jar and tell you I didn't, I know what the truth is. I know the cookie's in my stomach.
You're fully aware of reality.
Exactly. I am actively trying to hide the ball from you. But by doing so, I'm acknowledging that the truth exists, and I respect its power enough to try and conceal it. I'm trying to lead you away from a specific reality.
The liar is absolutely bound by the rules of reality. They are intimately aware of the truth, which is exactly why they are trying to subvert it. The liar and the truth teller are actually on opposite sides of the exact same game board.
But the bullshitter, and this is where Frankfurt's analysis is so incredibly relevant to the modern internet, the bullshitter is flipping the table entirely.
They're not even playing the game.
No. The goal isn't to convince you of a specific falsehood. The bullshitter actually does not care what the truth is. They are completely indifferent to it.
Their goal is to make the very distinction between truth and falsehood feel totally irrelevant.
Yes. If a political actor makes a claim that is blatantly, obviously false, something that can be debunked with, like a 5-second internet search, they aren't doing it because they think you'll believe the lie.
No, they know you can look it up.
Right. They are doing it to flood the zone with so much noise, so much exhausting contradiction that you, the citizen, just give up trying to find the ball at all.
And once you reach that stage, public discourse fundamentally changes. It's no longer about persuasion.
That's not a debate.
No, it's not a democratic pursuit of the best policy anymore. It becomes psychological warfare. The objective shifts from winning an argument on the merits to just causing confusion, cynicism, disorientation.
And pure tribal signaling.
Exactly. The bullshitter wins the moment you throw your hands up and say, well, I guess we'll never really know what happened.
Okay, but I have to stop you here because this leads to something that I deeply struggled with when reading the sources.
What's that?
It's what Thornberry calls the sophistication paradox.
Yes. This is the tough one to swallow.
It really is. Because if I look at this post-truth landscape, right, if I see people falling for identity protective cognition or being swept away by political bullshitters, my absolute first instinct is to say, well, the fix is obvious.
Education.
Yes, we need better education. We need to teach critical thinking and media literacy in schools. If people were just smarter, if they had better analytical skills, they wouldn't fall for the bullshit.
It seems like the most logical solution in the world.
It really does. But the essay argues the exact opposite.
It does, and it leans on some very robust empirical research, specifically citing work by scholars like Recker to totally dismantle that assumption.
Okay, lay it on me.
The research shows that higher education does not necessarily produce a greater recognition of truth in heavily polarized environments. In fact, education often exacerbates polarization.
It makes it worse.
It makes it significantly worse.
I need you to explain this to me because it sounds incredibly cynical. Are we seriously arguing that teaching critical thinking is a bad thing?
No, not inherently bad.
But how can becoming more educated, having a larger vocabulary, understanding data analysis, how can that make you more disconnected from reality? It feels like saying going to the gym makes your muscles weaker.
It's not that education makes you inherently disconnected from reality. It's about how those cognitive tools are deployed when they clash with the psychological track we discussed earlier.
Identity protective cognition.
Exactly. If your fundamental subconscious orientation is toward preserving your political identity rather than finding the objective truth, then intelligence simply becomes a weapon you use against reality. Think about it this way. If a person with very little formal education encounters a scientific fact that threatens their worldview, they might just say, I don't believe that, and move on.
Right, it's just a simple dismissal.
But highly educated citizens, people with advanced degrees, lawyers, engineers, academics, they don't just dismiss it.
What do they do?
They take their superior cognitive tools, their deep understanding of logical fallacies, their ability to parse complex data, and they use them to forcefully redescribe reality.
Redescribe it.
Yes. They use their education to build a vastly more robust, sophisticated fortress around their motivated reasoning.
Oh, I see. So if you hand a complex climate report to a highly educated person who is ideologically motivated to reject it, they won't just say it's fake.
No, that's too simple.
They will dig into page 47, find a minor statistical anomaly in the methodology, use a sophisticated vocabulary to magnify that anomaly, and construct a highly articulate 3,000-word essay on why the entire global consensus is flawed.
Exactly. They aren't using their big brains to find the truth. They are using their big brains to rationalize the lie that keeps them in their tribe.
That is.
Education, without a prior grounding in a desire for the truth, just makes you a much better rationalizer. You become a highly articulate defender of absurdity.
That is deeply unsettling because it means the modern knowledge system is incredible at producing information. I mean, we have more data at our fingertips on a smartphone than any civilization in human history.
Oh, by far.
But it completely fails at forming ontologically aligned persons. It fails to form people who actually value truth over their own identity.
Which is a terrifying realization.
It is. And if that's the case, it means our traditional technocratic solutions, just throwing more data and more fact checkers at the problem, are fundamentally mismatched to the crisis. You can't fact check someone out of a belief they use their PhD to rationalize.
Which forces us to ask a deeper historical question. How did we get here? How did our culture arrive at a place where truth isn't truth, and where brilliant people use their degrees to defend alternative facts? To understand that, the source material argues we have to track how high-level academic philosophy actually trickled down from the ivory tower and mutated into the digital town square.
The hidden philosophical drivers of the post-truth era. I really want to dig into this because the essay brings up a philosopher named W.V.O. Quine.
Yes.
And specifically his underdetermination thesis. Now, I have to admit, when I read the phrase underdetermination thesis, my eyes initially glazed over a bit.
It's very dense academic jargon.
It is. But the way Thornberry applies it is brilliant. Let's try to map this out so it's perfectly clear for everyone listening. What was Quine actually saying?
Well, W.V.O. Quine was a highly influential 20th century philosopher who made a very careful, specific observation about empirical science and how we form theories.
Okay.
He argued that empirical data, the raw, observable facts, can often support multiple logically contradicting narratives. The evidence, on its own, underdetermines the theory.
Meaning the facts alone don't automatically lock you into only one valid conclusion.
Precisely. Let's use the concrete example from the text because it really crystallizes the concept. Think about the Iran nuclear agreement.
Right.
You have a very specific set of agreed-upon empirical facts. International treaties were signed, uranium centrifuges were placed under monitoring by inspectors, and billions of dollars in frozen funds were released to the Iranian government.
And nobody debates that those events physically happened in space and time.
Right. The facts are solid, but, Quine would point out, that exact same set of empirical facts can be logically framed by one political faction as a sincere, strategic pivot toward economic stability, diplomatic normalization, and long-term peace.
Because the data supports that narrative.
It does. However, those exact same facts, the monitors, the money, the signatures, can be framed by an opposing political faction as a tactical, cynical move by a rogue state to lull Western adversaries into a false sense of security while continuing clandestine efforts with the newly released funds.
Oh, wow.
Both narratives are using the exact same data points to tell completely contradicting stories.
I can see how that applies to almost everything. Like, think about domestic economic data. A jobs report comes out showing massive hiring.
Happens all the time.
And the incumbent party says, look at these facts. Our policies are creating a booming, resilient economy.
And the opposition party.
They look at the exact same jobs report and say, look at these facts. The labor market is dangerously overheated, and it's a massive warning sign for runaway inflation. Same numbers, opposite realities.
And in a healthy, functioning epistemic environment, Quine's thesis is just a vital reminder to be intellectually humble. It's a reminder that evidence constrains our interpretations, but it doesn't always mandate absolute certainty. It keeps science honest.
But, as the essay points out, when this high-level, nuanced philosophical concept trickles down into a culture that has already lost its grounding in truth, it becomes incredibly dangerous.
Because cynical political actors weaponize it.
Yeah.
They take Quine's careful observation and they culturally flatten it. They simplify it into the sweeping claim that facts can support any interpretation.
Any interpretation at all.
Right. They use it to argue that rationality never actually mandates a single conclusion. And this creates what the sources call a cloak of plausibility for alternative facts. If data can always be reinterpreted, then my fringe alternative fact is theoretically just as valid as your established scientific consensus.
And that weaponization feels deeply tied to the second philosophical driver the essay explores, the postmodern distortion.
Yes.
Now, I have to say, postmodernism gets blamed for almost every ill in modern society, depending on who you ask.
It really is the ultimate boogeyman for some people.
It is. But the sources referencing thinkers like Brahms and Best and Kellner, they do something really fair here. They point out that postmodernism actually started with a very valid, different intention.
It did. The original intent of the postmodern critique in the mid to late 20th century was emancipatory. Philosophers like Foucault and Derrida were trying to expose how power structures shape what a society considers objective knowledge.
They were asking crucial historical questions, right?
Yeah. Who gets to decide what is true? How do the biases of the ruling class or the colonial power or the wealthy elite influence what becomes scientific or historical consensus?
It was a necessary critique of institutional arrogance.
It showed that sometimes what we call objective truth is just the prevailing narrative of the people in charge.
But then it escaped the university and hit the mainstream internet.
And that's where the trouble started.
The analogy that came to mind when reading this is that it's like taking a scalpel that was designed for incredibly delicate, precise neurosurgery and handing it to a mob to use as a machete in a street fight.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. When the nuance of postmodernism was stripped away and simplified for the masses, it devolved into this crude anything-goes relativism. It mutated into the populistic, well, this is my truth, and that is your truth discourse.
And cynical political and cultural actors seized on this immediately.
Of course they did.
They realized they could use the language of postmodernism to reduce any factual consensus down to just being another narrative of a dominant elite.
Let me see if I have the mechanics of this right. If a massive body of climate scientists agree that human activity is warming the planet, the cynical actor doesn't actually have to go to the trouble of conducting decades of counter-research to disprove the science.
No, they just have to swing this distorted postmodern machete.
Exactly. They just say, well, your climate consensus is just a narrative being pushed by a cartel of academic elites to maintain their grant funding and exert control over the working class.
It completely bypasses the need for evidence. It just attacks the authority of the institution itself.
And it works because it sounds sophisticated. It uses the cadence of critical thinking to dismantle critical thinking.
But here is the linchpin of Thornberry's analysis. None of this philosophical trickling down, not Quine's underdetermination, not the postmodern distortion, none of it would have worked if the public still implicitly trusted the institutions that produce knowledge.
The machete only cuts because the armor of institutional credibility has already rusted away.
Which brings us directly to the institutional trust collapse. The phrase used in the source material by Fred Newman is the cartel of villains.
That's a strong phrase.
It is. The public increasingly views our leading experts, scientists, journalists, academics, public health officials, not as objective truth seekers working for the public good, but as a self-serving monopoly protecting its own turf.
And how did the credibility of our major institutions erode so thoroughly? Because it didn't happen overnight.
No, it was structural. The analysis breaks this erosion down into 4 peak waves of interference, 4 massive societal shifts that systematically dismantled public trust.
Let's walk through them, starting with the first wave, technological mediation.
Okay, so screens and algorithms.
We're talking about the information explosion and disruptive tech. Social media platforms, the sheer volume of digital information and the way it is mediated by engagement algorithms designed to provoke outrage, fundamentally increases the distance between the citizen and the actual supporting facts.
It's like looking through a funhouse mirror before you even see the data. You aren't experiencing reality directly. You are experiencing a heavily curated, algorithmically driven simulation of it that is designed to keep you clicking.
Precisely. The medium itself distorts the message. Now, the second wave is elite failures. And this is vital because we cannot just blame the internet. We cannot ignore the role institutions played in their own demise.
Yeah, they did it to themselves in many ways.
Think back over the last 20 years. The intelligence failures leading to the Iraq War.
Right.
The 2008 financial crisis, where rating agencies stamped AAA on toxic assets, crashing the global economy, and yet virtually no one in the financial elite was held accountable.
People remember that.
Add to that contradictory public health messaging or exposés of academic fraud. These things severely, perhaps permanently, damage the moral authority of the establishment. When the public sees institutions acting in incompetent or self-serving ways, they stop believing those institutions are capable of objectivity.
It's hard to tell a working-class family who lost their home in 2008 to just trust the financial experts. The trust was burned on the altar of institutional failure.
Exactly. Okay, what is the third wave?
The third wave we just touched on, academic relativism. The seeping of that postmodern anything-goes mentality from university departments into the broader culture, actively undermining the public's confidence that objective knowledge is even a coherent concept.
If universities teach that all truth is just a power game, the public will eventually believe them and treat the university itself as just another power player.
And finally, the fourth wave,
Media polarization. The transformation of journalism from a public utility tasked with informing citizens into a segmented ideological theater.
The echo chambers.
The media landscape fractured into partisan echo chambers. And when news becomes entertainment designed to validate the audience's pre-existing biases, the transition from actual policy debate to a perpetual war of attrition over the criteria of truth itself is complete.
So you have these four massive waves: tech algorithms, elite hypocrisy, academic relativism, and partisan media, all crashing into the foundations of our institutions simultaneously.
That's a perfect storm.
It is. And how do the institutions respond when they realize the public doesn't believe them anymore? This is where the tragedy of our current moment really deepens. The institutions respond with what Thornberry calls the technocratic response, which, as I read it, essentially means yelling more data, louder and louder.
Yes, and it completely spectacularly backfires. When institutions respond to intense public skepticism by just doubling down on facts and aggressively asserting their credentials, they inadvertently reinforce the exact perception they are trying to fight.
They look like an arrogant cartel.
No. To a skeptical public, it looks like the incumbent is just trying to protect its monopoly on truth by aggressively enforcing its own internal rules.
The source material draws an incredible historical parallel here that we have to unpack. It says this modern technocratic posture mirrors the Catholic Church defending its authority against Galileo in the 17th century.
It's a profound comparison.
I want to pause here because this is such a vivid way to understand what is happening today. Walk us through how the CDC, or the modern academy, is acting like the Inquisition.
Think back to 1633. When the Church faced Galileo and his heliocentric model of the solar system, they didn't just argue astronomical mathematics, they argued authority. The Church possessed what Fred Newman calls the franking privileges of incumbency. They were the official, universally recognized seat of truth.
So the Church said to Galileo, "We are the arbiters of reality. You must submit to our criteria, our scripture, and our institutional authority."
Today, the scientific, academic, and media establishment holds those same franking privileges. They're the official seat of cognitive power in the modern world.
So when they stand at a podium and say, "Trust us, we have the peer-reviewed data, the science is settled," stop asking questions.
To a public that feels alienated, financially stressed, and deeply distrustful due to past elite failures, it doesn't sound like reason, it sounds like tyranny.
That is a staggering insight. Authority without transparency appears tyrannical. Expertise without humility appears manipulative. If you just yell, "Trust the science," at someone who feels the system is rigged against them, you sound exactly like a cardinal telling a peasant to trust the Latin Mass they can't even read.
It's a massive communication failure.
Which leads us to one of the most disturbing but deeply clarifying concepts in the entire deep dive. What happens to the people who feel completely alienated by this? The people who feel like the institutions are just the thought police trying to control them.
This leads to the burn-it-down imaginary and tactical bafflement.
This is absolutely crucial for understanding why people seem to aggressively believe things that are patently, observably ridiculous. We have to look at the psychology of cynicism. The text references the behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Specifically, their work on prospect theory and loss frame logic.
Okay, let's break that down because behavioral economics is fascinating. What does it mean for a population to be in a loss frame?
A loss frame refers to populations who perceive themselves as fundamentally disadvantaged by recent economic or social shifts. They feel left behind by globalization or ignored by cultural elites or crushed by inflation.
They feel they have lost their status, their security, their voice.
Exactly. Kahneman and Tversky's research shows a very specific human quirk. When people feel they are operating in a state of gain, they are risk-averse. They protect what they have.
Right.
But when people feel they are in a state of loss, when they are in a loss frame, they become highly risk-seeking. They feel they have nothing to lose.
It's the casino logic.
It is. If you are down thousands of dollars at the blackjack table, you don't play conservatively. You start making wildly irrational, high-risk bets to try and blow up the board and get your money back.
So how does that casino logic translate to believing massive, sprawling conspiracies, like the wave of narratives claiming that the World Economic Forum is trying to force everyone to eat bugs, or that global elites are using vaccines for microchip tracking?
Because rejecting the plausibility structures of the elite, rejecting the official narrative of reality, becomes a psychological way of reclaiming power.
Wow.
If you feel totally powerless in your economic life and totally ignored in your social life, embracing a radical conspiracy theory is a territorial claim over your own mind. It's a way of saying, you coastal elites might control the banks and the government and the media, but you do not control my thoughts. I know the real truth.
It is an act of defiance against a system they view as encroaching and oppressive. The conspiracy theory is a psychological shield against powerlessness.
This connects directly to what the researcher Hartley calls tactical bafflement.
I love this phrase, tactical bafflement. If you spend any time on social media, you see people making absurd claims, pushing flat earth theories, or saying birds aren't real, or claiming historical events were entirely staged with crisis actors, and you think they must know. On some level, this is crazy.
But Hartley argues they aren't pushing these theories because they are deeply, genuinely convinced of the physics of a flat Earth. They're doing it to own the libs.
They're doing it to assert what Hartley calls rugged cognitive self-sovereignty.
Exactly. The absurdity of the claim is a feature, not a bug. If I make a claim that is completely outside the bounds of rational discourse, if I say the moon landing was filmed on a soundstage by Stanley Kubrick, I am denying you, the expert, the ability to engage with me on your agreed-upon rational terms.
You want to show me physics equations?
Yeah.
I don't care. I've rejected your entire paradigm.
I am forcing you to play my game. And this baffles and demoralizes the expert class. They pull their hair out trying to fact-check the unfact-checkable.
And for the person making the claim, it creates incredible emotional catharsis. It's a deliberate, tactical exit from shared reality designed to symbolically punish the perceived oppressor. They're burning down the structures of truth because, frankly, it feels good to watch the arrogant institutions panic.
So if we take a breath and look at the landscape we've just mapped out, we have a perfect storm of systemic failure.
We really do. We have a biological drive to protect our tribe over the truth. We have highly educated people using their massive brains to rationalize away facts. We have a trickle-down philosophy that says facts are just narratives anyway.
We have institutions that have lost all trust due to their own failures and respond to criticism by arrogantly yelling, "Submit to our science."
And we have an alienated public that finds deep emotional joy in burning down reality just to spite those experts.
If more facts don't work and education actually makes it worse and institutions are despised, what actually fixes this? Are we just doomed to fragment into a million angry little realities?
That question is the transition point of Thornberry's entire thesis. Because everything we have discussed so far, the evolutionary psychology, the political polarization, the sociology of trust, is just describing the symptoms of the disease.
To find the cure, we have to move to the deeper diagnosis. And this is where we transition from epistemology, how we know things, into ontology, the crisis of being.
Okay, let's tread carefully here because ontology is a heavy philosophical term. The study of being, the nature of reality itself. Thornberry argues that our epistemic crisis, our inability to know what is true, is fundamentally a disorder of being.
I need you to map this out for me. How does the nature of reality itself fix a broken comment section on the internet?
Well, Thornberry states that the modern world has attempted a very dangerous experiment. We have tried to construct systems of knowledge that are completely detached from the ontological ground of reality.
We thought we could just have data and facts and scientific method floating in a vacuum.
Completely disconnected from any deeper philosophical, moral, or structural foundation. We reduce truth to mere data processing.
But once you detach knowledge from the structure of reality itself, it has no anchor. It inevitably dissolves into the relativism, cynicism, and ideological warfare we just described. You can't have truth without a framework of being that sustains it.
To really grasp this, I think we have to look at how Thornberry frames the concept of falsehood. And I want to set this up because reading this section fundamentally flies my perspective on how the world works.
It's a paradigm shift for sure.
Usually when we think about a lie or a falsehood or misinformation, we view it as a thing. We view it as an active entity that is battling truth.
We picture truth as an army of light on one side of a battlefield and falsehood as an equally real, equally substantial army of darkness on the other side, and they are clashing swords.
We think of falsehood as an alternative substance.
But Thornberry, drawing heavily on classical philosophical and theological traditions, think Augustine or Aquinas, argues that this is a foundational mistake.
Think about the physical nature of darkness. Darkness is not a thing. It does not possess independent being. There are no darkness particles that you can measure in a lab.
Darkness is simply the privation, the absence of light. Where light fails to reach, we call that state darkness.
Similarly, think about death. Death does not possess independent vitality. Death is simply the privation, the withdrawal of life.
So if we follow that logic, falsehood is not an alternative truth.
Exactly. Falsehood is not a substance. Falsehood is the privation of truth.
The modern post-truth condition is not the sudden emergence of millions of competing, equally valid truths. It is the progressive withdrawal of truth from the structures of our discourse. Truth has receded, leaving a void.
And when truth withdraws, it leaves a vacuum. And human beings cannot tolerate a vacuum. So what fills that void?
Exactly what we've been talking about for the last half hour. Emotional identity construction, power competition, narrative warfare, and performative bullshit.
As Thornberry says, these aren't alternative systems of knowledge. They are adaptive behaviors within epistemic darkness. We are fumbling around in a pitch-black room, forming tribes, swinging clubs at each other, and making up stories about what the room looks like, simply because the light of truth has withdrawn.
Which brings us to the core ontological framework of the essay, the proposed solution, the framework of love, life, and light.
Now, I want to issue a massive caveat here, because we have to be very careful. When a modern secular listener hears the phrase love, life, and light, their brain immediately recoils.
They think of a greeting card or a live, laugh, love, throw pillow or some sort of sentimental new age spirituality that has no place in rigorous public policy.
Right. It sounds like we were suddenly pivoting from behavioral economics and quantum philosophy into a wellness retreat.
But Thornberry is emphatic. These are not sentimental categories. They are not emotional buzzwords. They are the structural properties of reality itself.
They are the fundamental forces, almost like the physics of human civilization, through which reality coheres, becomes intelligible, and sustains order.
You can think of them like gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong nuclear force, but applied to human society, where these three pillars operate, order, truth, and flourishing arise.
Where they are rejected or obscured, fragmentation, chaos, and epistemic darkness inevitably follow.
So let's unpack each of these three pillars of reality, starting with light. Because without light, we can't even see the metaphorical X-ray we talked about at the beginning of the show. What is the structural property of light?
Light represents intelligibility and truth. It is the ontological ground that establishes that reality exists independently of our interpretation. The universe has a structure, and it can be known.
Light means that truth corresponds to reality. It means that empirical evidence actually constrains our interpretations, and that human reason is capable of operating within the illumination of that truth to solve problems.
If a society loses its anchoring in light, if it embraces the postmodern distortion that everything is just a narrative, perception becomes hopelessly distorted, rational discourse collapses.
And you get exactly what we have now. Relativistic chaos, bullshit culture, and the weaponization of interpretation with the loudest, most aggressive voice wins. Light is the anchor that says, yes, there is a real world out there, and our words have to match it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Light is objective reality. What about life?
Life represents the generative vitality of societies. A society governed by life is one that allows its people to participate meaningfully in a shared existence. It's about economic opportunity, community stability, generational flourishing, and civic participation.
So life is about having a stake in the game.
Exactly. When populations feel excluded, powerless, or economically displaced by globalization or technological shifts, when they are stuck in that loss frame we discussed earlier, they are experiencing a privation of life. The vitality of the society is not reaching them.
And when life is withdrawn, populations become stagnant and resentful. And this is the key connection. When you are starved for life, epistemic rebellion becomes highly attractive.
People want to burn down the system and reject the light, the truth, because the system isn't giving them life. You cannot ask an economically crushed, alienated community to rationally submit to the light of elite consensus when they are being denied the life of participation.
That connects the dots perfectly. You can't just yell trusted data at someone who feels like the system is slowly killing them.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most challenging pillar for modern institutions to grasp: love.
Love governs the relational coherence of being. And again, we must strip away the sentimentality. Thornberry is not talking about romantic love or endless tolerance of bad behavior.
Thornberry defines love in the context of governance as seeking the good of the other within the pursuit of truth. It means interacting with citizens through respectful discourse, transparent accountability, and the genuine recognition of legitimate grievances. It is the opposite of contempt.
I want to push on this because I can hear a skeptical policy wonk listening to this saying, why is love critical to epistemology? I don't need to love a bridge to know the math holding it up is true? Why do we need relational coherence to know what is factual?
Because human beings are not calculators. Without relational trust, truth claims simply cannot be received.
If a government institution or a media outlet or an academic body communicates its findings from a position of superiority, arrogance, or contempt, if they call the public deplorable or backwards or uneducated, they instantly destroy relational credibility.
And when relational credibility is destroyed, what happens? Identity protective cognition takes over. If I genuinely believe that you hate me, that you view me with contempt, I am not going to believe your data, no matter how empirically accurate it is. I will view your facts as a weapon aimed at my destruction.
Love stabilizes discourse because it removes the psychological triggers that make us defensive. When people feel respected and valued rather than attacked and marginalized, they actually become psychologically capable of reconsidering their deeply held beliefs.
So, if an institution lacks love, if it views the public with technocratic contempt, it doesn't matter how much light or truth and data it possesses. The public will reject light because it is delivered without love.
This is the ultimate diagnosis of the essay. The post-truth era is not a technology problem. It is a civilizational condition of epistemic privation. We lack love, life, and light within the very structures of our governance and discourse.
But a diagnosis is only half the battle. We are not just going to leave you staring into the epistemic abyss. The sources provide a strategic blueprint for restoration. How do we take these lofty ontological concepts and practically apply them to govern in a fractured reality?
Let's walk through the practical applications, starting with restoring light. How do our institutions get a cynical public to believe in a shared reality again?
It requires a massive structural shift toward epistemic humility. The sources make it clear that institutions have to entirely abandon the old 20th century model of speaking truth to power, or assuming they can just hand down pristine certainty from the mountaintop.
They must adopt transparent uncertainty. Certainty, inflation destroys trust faster than almost anything else.
Right. We saw this vividly during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. If a public health organization comes out and says, we are 100% certain about how this completely novel virus transmits, and here is the absolute rule. And then the scientific understanding naturally evolves 2 weeks later. The public doesn't say, oh, the scientific method is updating.
Public says you lied to us. Your credibility is annihilated.
Exactly. To restore light, institutions have to communicate clearly and relentlessly about what is known, what is unknown, and what is uncertain. Transparency must replace authority claims.
You can no longer demand submission from the public. You have to invite their examination. You have to say, here's the data we have, here are its limitations, and here's why we are making this recommendation. It treats the citizen as an adult capable of nuance.
And there's a very specific tactical communication strategy mentioned here for restoring light that I found fascinating. It's moving from debunking to pre-bunking. Preemptive narrative inoculation. Explain the psychology of how this works.
Debunking is inherently reactive. It's playing defense. It is trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube after a lie or a conspiracy theory has already gone viral. And psychologically, once a lie has taken root in someone's identity, debunking it is almost impossible.
Pre-bunking is proactive. It involves explicitly exposing the political, economic, or psychological motives behind anti-science or conspiracy narratives before they take hold in the public consciousness.
So what does that sound like in practice?
It sounds like an institution addressing the public and saying, hey, over the next few months as we approach the election or as we roll out this new energy grid, you're going to see a narrative popping up claiming X. Let us show you exactly why certain cynical actors are going to push that specific narrative, the emotional manipulation tactics they will use, and how they benefit financially or politically from confusing you.
It's a cognitive vaccine. You give the public a weakened version of the bullshit, so their mental immune system can recognize the manipulation when they encounter the real thing in the wild. You inoculate the public by exposing the mechanics of the grift. I love that because it respects the intelligence of the citizen.
Okay, what about restoring love? Relational trust. Let's go back to that Thanksgiving dinner hypothetical or a town hall meeting. How do you communicate vital facts to a demographic whose entire political identity is wrapped up in denying those facts?
You have to use what the strategic communication literature calls identity-consistent rhetoric.
This is where the rubber meets the road on love. You do not attack their core identity. You do not tell them their values are wrong. Instead, you communicate the scientific findings or the necessary policy shifts through the values and identity frames of the target audience.
Give me a tangible example of that.
Let's take climate change policy and transitioning to renewable energy. If you are speaking to a demographic whose identity is deeply tied to concepts of free enterprise, rugged individualism, liberty, and national security, you do not pitch environmental regulations as a collective globalist moral obligation that requires them to sacrifice their lifestyle for the greater good. That triggers identity protective cognition immediately. They will reject the data because the framing threatens their identity.
Instead, using identity-consistent rhetoric, you pitch the exact same policy through the lens of market innovation, achieving total energy independence from foreign adversaries, and protecting private property rights from devastating climate damage like floods and wildfires.
You translate the facts about climate change into a language of love, respecting their values that they can actually hear without feeling attacked. You aren't changing the data, you are changing the delivery system so it bypasses their defensive shields.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at a higher institutional level, restoring love requires what the sociologist Fred Newman calls building a united front. This is a profoundly counterintuitive concept. The united front is a coming together, a truce between the scientific establishment and the valid elements of postmodern critique.
Wait, hold on. Didn't we spend a significant portion of this deep dive establishing that the postmodern distortion, the machete, was what destroyed the concept of objective truth in the first place? Why would science ally with that?
The distorted populistic version of postmodernism is the machete, yes. But remember, the original valid core of the critique, the idea that institutional power can overreach and that experts have biases, needs to be humbly acknowledged by the institutions themselves.
The united front means the scientific establishment must willingly, publicly acknowledge the limits of the scientific paradigm when it is applied to complex human concerns. Science is a miraculous tool for measuring CO2 levels, or mapping the human genome, or determining the tensile strength of steel.
But when technocrats try to use the absolute unquestionable authority of science with a capital S to dictate complex economic trade-offs, or to adjudicate messy matters of social justice, or to micromanage human psychology, they overreach. They act like the church in 1633.
Ah, I see. So by willingly stepping up and saying, our scientific tools are incredible, but they have limits, and they cannot solve every moral, political, or economic problem, science actually protects its authority in its actual domain. It stops looking like an all-consuming, arrogant cartel trying to run our lives, and starts looking like a trustworthy, humble partner in governance. That builds deep relational trust. That restores love.
Precisely. Which brings us to the final pillar, restoring life, civic re-anchoring.
Because, as we've established, facts alone don't persuade. Data doesn't change behavior. Facts have to fit into a framework of human meaning and participation.
Right. We talked at length about how alienation, economic displacement, and a feeling of powerlessness drive the burn-it-down epistemic rebellion. To cure that privation of life, we must practically empower local communities as sites of knowledge formation.
Knowledge cannot just be something that flows downward from centralized elites in coastal cities or remote academic hubs or bureaucratic agencies in Washington or Brussels. That creates resentment. Knowledge creation has to involve distributed participation. When people have local agency, economic opportunity, and a tangible say in how their immediate communities are governed, they feel anchored. They experience life.
And when a population experiences life, they no longer need the destructive emotional catharsis of burning down reality.
This is about skin in the game. Distributed participation restores epistemic legitimacy.
If a federal agency just drops a massive report on water quality onto a rural town, the town might view it as a globalist conspiracy to shut down their farms. But if the local high school science classes, the local farmers, and the local university helped gather the data for their own watershed, they aren't going to reject it. They participated in it. It's real to them. The knowledge was generated through life.
That is exactly the mechanism. Reality is built together locally and relationally, not just handed down from above.
This brings us to the big picture implications. We've laid out the diagnosis, the ontological crisis of truth privation. And we've laid out the blueprint, restoring love, life, and light through humility, identity-consistent rhetoric, and civic participation.
But I want to ask the dark question, what is the cost of failure? What happens if modern civilization looks at this ontological crisis, shrugs, and decides to just ignore it? What happens if we just accept the epistemic breach, the bullshit, and the polarization as the permanent new normal?
The sources warn of what they term discursive capitulation, a total societal collapse of meaningful debate. It leads directly to the politics of payback, a permanent war of attrition against logic itself.
When a political actor's policy stance becomes logically untenable, or when their corruption is exposed, instead of conceding, resigning, or compromising as they would in a healthy system, they simply evade defeat by making claims so aggressively absurd that they cannot even be refuted within mainstream epistemics.
They realize they're losing the chess match, so they just light the chessboard on fire and declare victory.
And that is the ultimate dead end of human governance. Because you cannot govern, you cannot build infrastructure, you cannot fight a pandemic, and you cannot maintain an economy in a society that does not share a reality.
To hammer this point home, the expert analysis in the source material invokes one of the most vital, clear-eyed political philosophers of the 20th century, Hannah Arendt. She spent her life studying the origins of totalitarianism, watching how societies collapse into absolute darkness. And her warning here is chilling.
It is the ultimate blinking red light warning for our era. Arendt pointed out that the true goal of totalitarian propaganda, the goal of substituting relentless lies and bullshit for factual truth, is not simply to make people believe a specific individual lie. The dictator doesn't actually care if you believe the lie deep in your heart.
The true goal is much, much darker. The goal of flooding the zone with bullshit is to destroy the mental means by which we take our bearings in the real world.
I want everyone listening to just let that sink in for a second. The goal isn't persuasion. The goal is to destroy the mental means by which we take our bearings, to break your compass so thoroughly that you don't even know which way is north.
Without the fundamental category of truth versus falsehood, without that basic internal and societal compass, collective action is utterly impossible. The sense of reality required for shared existence evaporates.
The essential currency of citizenship in a free society is the ability to distinguish fact from fiction. If a population loses that ability or willingly surrenders it to tribalism, they can no longer govern themselves. They become completely, hopelessly vulnerable to whoever can shout the loudest or whoever can manipulate the digital algorithms the best. A democratic order simply cannot survive in absolute epistemic darkness.
That is incredibly heavy. It borders on apocalyptic. But it is exactly why understanding this topic, unpacking this essay, is so intensely critical. This isn't just an abstract academic theory for debate club. It is the survival mechanism of a free society.
Which brings us to our closing insight. Let's summarize where we've been, because we have covered immense ground today.
The epistemic breach, this terrifying, exhausting reality where we can't agree on basic facts, is not a permanent doom. Thornberry frames this entire crisis not as an obituary for civilization, but as both a severe warning and an incredible opportunity for renewal.
The ontological bottom line is this. Restoring love, life, and light is not about imposing a theocracy. It's not about forcing everyone to adopt religious language or singing kumbaya around a campfire.
It is simply about realigning human governance, human communication, and institutional behavior with the undeniable structure of reality itself. Reality is naturally intelligible. It can be known. Reality is relational. We are bound to one another. And reality is generative. It requires participation to flourish.
You can choose to ignore these properties. Societies can and have built entire political movements based on lies, contempt, alienation, and performative bullshit. But reality always bats last.
The resulting chaos, the fragmentation, the sheer exhaustion of living in a post-truth world will eventually force a correction. The systems will collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. If societies choose cynicism and tactical bafflement, the collapse of shared reality will only accelerate. But if we choose to realign our institutions and our personal interactions with love, life, and light, we can recover stability, we can recover sanity, we can recover truth.
Because the ultimate goal of governance and the ultimate goal of citizenship isn't just passing a bill or winning an election or owning your opponent in a comment section. It is the preservation of a shared world. A world where truth can be known, life can flourish, and human relationships can endure the friction of disagreement.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought for you to mull over on your own as you go about your week.
We started this deep dive talking about a broken X-ray machine. We talked about the vertigo of sitting in a waiting room where half the people are denying the existence of bones and the other half are screaming about elite control. Over the last hour, we've shown you exactly why they are screaming. We've unpacked the evolutionary fear, the economic privation, the institutional failure, and the loss of trust that drives people to burn down reality.
But if Thornberry is right, if truth is not just a collection of cold, hard facts floating in a void waiting to be fact-checked,
Yeah.
if truth is actually a shared world that we have to actively build and maintain together,
A world built through relational trust and respect, which is love.
a world built through meaningful local participation and agency, which is life,
And a world built through a humble, transparent anchoring to evidence, which is light.
then the burden of fixing this epistemic breach doesn't just fall on the government. It doesn't just fall on the scientists or the media executives or the algorithms. It falls on us. It falls on you.
What small piece of that shared world are you responsible for maintaining today? When you interact online, or when you sit down at that Thanksgiving table with a relative who sees the world completely differently, are you contributing to the darkness of performative bullshit and tribal victory? Are you using your sophistication to build fortresses? Or are you actively bringing light, life, and love to the conversation?
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. It's a heavy topic, but an essential one. Keep questioning, keep anchoring yourself to reality, and we will catch you next time.